There is a very thin, blurry line between a breathtaking photo and a crime scene photo. Today, we are exploring 10 people who violently sprinted past that line. We are breaking down the absolute dumbest ways people checked out of the gene pool while trying to capture the perfect viral selfie. Please value your actual life over your digital one and never try to recreate this nonsense. 1. Meet Tyler, a guy whose absolute supreme confidence was only rivaled by his profound misunderstanding of basic aerodynamics. Tyler viewed warning labels less as safety guidelines and more as a challenge issued by cowards. He was an aspiring influencer who considered basic survival instincts a barrier to good content. His grand master plan for internet immortality involved a custom-built carbon fiber FPV racing drone. For the uninitiated, these aren't your cute little plastic toys that hover over a wedding reception. These are basically flying lawnmower blades strapped to a high-voltage battery. The carbon fiber blades spin at thousands of revolutions per minute. They are designed to cut through heavy wind, which means they treat biological obstacles like a minor inconvenience. They can easily hit 100 miles an hour in the blink of an eye. Naturally, Tyler looked at this mechanical murder Hornet and thought it was the perfect prop for a slow-motion selfie. His vision was simple yet breathtakingly idiotic. He wanted to fly the drone directly at his face at maximum velocity. He planned to catch it out of thin air at the very last microsecond. Oh, and he had to do this while holding his smartphone in his other hand to guarantee the perfect camera angle. The logistics of this master plan were a recipe for absolute disaster. Tyler marched out to an empty soccer field and literally tossed the actual remote control into the grass. Who needs an emergency brake when you have raw, unfiltered hubris? He locked the drone's automated tracking software onto his own face, and without a second thought, pinned the digital throttle. Now, here is a fun physics lesson for the aspiring influencers out there. A 4-pound object traveling at 100 miles an hour covers distance much faster than human nerve endings can send a panic signal to the brain. Tyler didn't factor this in. He was too busy staring at his phone screen. He made tiny adjustments to his jawline to ensure he looked properly heroic. The drone shrieked across the field like a heat-seeking missile. Tyler simply stood there, flashing a brilliantly white practice smile at the camera lens. He was entirely blind to the rapidly expanding physical object outside of his peripheral vision. He waited for that ultimate cinematic frame. He completely overestimated his own hand-eye coordination by a factor of about 1,000,000. Tyler hit the shutter button on his phone screen. The drone bypassed his casually outstretched hand completely. The exposed high-speed carbon fiber propeller blades made direct, catastrophic contact with his neck and upper body. It wasn't a catch. It was a high-speed kinetic strike by a piece of consumer electronics. Tyler's quest for digital clout ended in a catastrophic system-wide shutdown before his brain even registered the mistake. The authorities found him face up in the grass, his flawless smile still frozen on his face. The official police report didn't mention his subscriber count, simply listing the cause of death as a fatal miscalculation of drone-to-skull aerodynamics. 2. The internet is a graveyard of terrible ideas, but few are as humiliating as dying at the hands of campfire confectionery. Enter Kyle, a man who possessed a pathological need for digital validation and absolutely zero understanding of the physical limits of the human mouth. Never meeting a viral challenge he didn't immediately try to monetize, his final battle was against the legendary hamster cheek challenge. The goal was simple: cram as many marshmallows into your mouth as physically possible to look like a hoarding rodent, then snap a hilarious selfie. While a normal person might use standard, bite-sized marshmallows, Kyle, driven by a toxic mix of ambition and stupidity, went to a warehouse store to buy the jumbo roasters. These aren't snacks. They are massive, fist-sized cylinders of pure gelatin and corn syrup that resemble edible couch cushions. Setting up his ring light in his bathroom, our hero began violently packing these sugary sponges past his teeth, shoving them deep into his cheeks with the frantic energy of a squirrel preparing for a nuclear winter. Here is where Kyle's lack of basic chemistry knowledge became a fatal flaw, as he completely failed to consider that the environment inside a human mouth is humid, hot, and filled with saliva. As Kyle jammed the fifth and sixth jumbo marshmallow into his rapidly expanding face, his salivary glands panicked, flooding his mouth in a desperate attempt to break down the massive sugar invasion. Instead of dissolving the treats, this triggered a horrifying reaction where the saliva melted the outer layers of the jumbo roasters, fusing the individual marshmallows together and transforming them from fluffy treats into a single, cohesive, rapidly hardening block of industrial-strength sticky tack. This sugary concrete perfectly molded itself to the entire interior of his oral cavity, just as Kyle, with his cheeks stretched tight enough to bounce a quarter off them, finally raised his phone. Needing to add a touch of spontaneous charm to the photo, the aspiring influencer decided to force out a massive, performative fake laugh for the camera. This was the terminal mistake, because to laugh, you have to inhale. When Kyle sharply gasped through his mouth, the massive difference in air pressure acted like a shop vacuum, violently sucking the entire fused, sticky mass of hardening gelatin backwards to bypass his tongue entirely and slam into the back of his throat. The sugary plug formed a flawless, airtight, permanent seal directly over his windpipe, causing panic to set in instantly. Physically incapable of clawing the incredibly sticky mass out of his throat, every frantic attempt to swallow just wedged the sweet, gelatinous cork deeper into his respiratory system. He collapsed onto his bathroom floor, completely locked out of his own oxygen supply by a snack designed for toddlers. The paramedics eventually found him perfectly framed in his ring light, having successfully asphyxiated himself from the inside out using dessert. There was no grand digital legacy left behind, just a profoundly embarrassing autopsy report noting that the undisputed victor of the hamster cheek challenge was, in fact, the marshmallow. 3. It takes a truly incredible level of delusion to turn a moving vehicle into a personal recording studio. Brad, a wildly overconfident amateur vocalist suffering from a lethal combination of unearned swagger and zero spatial awareness, firmly believed his mid-sized sedan was a soundstage waiting to be unleashed on his 12 loyal subscribers. Operating under the absurd assumption that he could pilot 2 tons of steel down a crowded interstate while giving a Grammy-worthy performance, he decided the natural acoustics of his Honda simply could not go to waste. Cruising down a 6-lane highway at 80 miles per hour on a clear Tuesday evening, our rising star mounted his smartphone directly to the center of his steering wheel, hit record on a live stream, and began aggressively belting out an emotionally charged power ballad. Consider the terrifying mathematics of this decision. Driving at 80 miles per hour means covering roughly 117 feet of asphalt every single second. So taking your eyes off the road for just 3 seconds to check a screen is the equivalent of driving the entire length of a football field while blindfolded. Brad wasn't just glancing at his phone. He was maintaining intense, unblinking eye contact with his own digital reflection, completely captivated by the emotional pain he was bringing to the second verse. Constantly monitoring the screen to ensure his dramatic facial expressions were perfectly framed, the vocalist needed to maximize his artistic output for the impending high note. Confidently engaging the cruise control, Brad completely abandoned his primary duty as a motorist by removing both hands from the steering wheel entirely to gesture wildly at the camera. Leaning closer to the glowing screen and throwing his head back with closed eyes to nail the vocal crescendo, his knee bumped the steering column. While it was a microscopic shift, at 80 miles per hour, a tiny shift becomes a massive problem, causing the vehicle to immediately begin a smooth, incredibly fast drift out of the fast lane and straight toward the grassy median. So completely immersed in the auditory illusion of his own impending stardom that he ignored reality entirely, Brad didn't even register the violent vibration of the highway rumble strips tearing at his tires, probably assuming it was just a really heavy bass drop kicking in to support his masterful vocal run. Never opening his eyes to see the massive, reinforced concrete pillar of an upcoming pedestrian overpass rapidly expanding in his windshield, he preferred to stay locked into his performance right up to the very last millisecond. Just as Brad hit his spectacular, triumphant high note, his front bumper made catastrophic, unimpeded contact with the immovable concrete monolith at full highway speed. The instantaneous deceleration completely reorganized the atomic structure of both the sedan and the singer. Brad hadn't just dropped the mic on his musical career. He had forcefully ejected himself from the gene pool entirely. First responders didn't find a viral sensation, instead discovering a rolling acoustic chamber that had been folded like a cheap accordion, serving as a brutal reminder that physics does not care about your vocal range. 4. Zoos install thick glass enclosures for a very specific reason. Not to protect tourists from the weather, but to protect the animals from the sheer, unfiltered stupidity of people like Kevin. Viewing the entire animal kingdom as a series of unpaid extras for his social media grid, our protagonist visited a major metropolitan wildlife park on a sunny afternoon to target the Arctic marine mammal exhibit for a selfie with the resident male walrus. For those unfamiliar with basic marine biology, a full-grown male walrus is not a sea puppy. It is a 2-ton biological submarine equipped with twin facial spears, possessing the body mass of a standard sedan and the territorial aggression of a nightclub bouncer. When Kevin approached the reinforced viewing glass and raised his expensive smartphone, he was immediately offended by reality, as the plexiglass was covered in the smudged handprints of countless toddlers, and the afternoon sun cast a terrible glare right across his camera lens. While a rational human accepts the glare and moves on, Kevin considered it a personal insult to his artistic vision. Spotting the 12-foot-high chain-link safety fence separating the public walkway from the open-air pool, and ignoring the bright red warning signs, which he viewed as mere suggestions for less athletic people, the vlogger tossed his jacket onto the concrete, shimmied up the fence like a man possessed, vaulted over the top, and dropped silently into the restricted zone. Creeping right up to the very edge of the deep water basin, he found his prize, a massive walrus, basking on a synthetic ice floe just inches away. Finally possessing an unobstructed, glare-free background, Kevin turned his back on the 4,000-pound apex predator and held his phone high in the air to begin a series of brooding facial expressions. He completely failed to understand that walruses are highly reactive creatures that do not appreciate uninvited hairless apes invading their personal sleeping quarters. Cracking open one giant bloodshot eye to assess the situation with cold, mammalian indifference, the beast simply lunged forward with explosive speed. Clamping its massive jaws onto Kevin's expensive designer backpack, the animal effortlessly dragged the screaming tourist backward off the ledge and into the water. Immediately executing a steep vertical dive, the walrus pulled its newfound chew toy straight down to the bottom of the 20-foot-deep freezing saltwater pool. Thrashing in the freezing water and desperately clawing at his backpack straps, Kevin found the waterlogged fabric had cinched tight against his chest, trapping him as the walrus simply rested its massive, blubber-dense chin directly on top of him. Casually pinning the tourist against the painted concrete floor like a deeply unamused biological anchor, the 2-ton creature held its breath effortlessly while Kevin ran out of oxygen in under a minute. Once his lungs finally gave out under the crushing weight of a marine mammal that just wanted a quiet nap, zoo staff eventually drained the pool to recover the waterlogged tourist. The local news didn't focus on his bravery. Instead, Kevin became a cautionary tale in the zoo's updated safety brochure, serving as a definitive example of why you never invade the personal bathtub of a 2-ton predator. 5. Macro photography requires extreme patience and extreme attention to detail. Oliver possessed $10,000 worth of imported camera gear, but possessed zero situational awareness. This amateur macro photographer had zero interest in actual wildlife, obsessing exclusively over textures, patterns, and close-up images of tree bark and cool rocks. The man could identify 14 types of lichen, but couldn't tell a hornet from a housefly. Venturing deep into a humid state forest on a Sunday afternoon, Oliver hunted for the perfect textured background. Crawling slowly through the thick underbrush on his stomach, eyes glued entirely to the tiny digital viewfinder of his camera, our oblivious artist spotted something incredibly unique resting at the base of a massive oak tree. It looked like a giant, intricately woven sphere of gray, papery rock. It was a masterpiece of natural geometry. Oliver immediately envisioned artistic glory, wanting a macro selfie with his own eyeball focused in the foreground and the fascinating papery rock blurred in the background. Army crawling right up to the object, the photographer was deaf to the low, mechanical humming sound vibrating through the soil and completely ignored the basic warning signs of nature. A seasoned outdoorsman recognizes that shape instantly. It was a massive, hyperactive colony of bald-faced hornets. These insects are essentially flying hypodermic needles filled with liquid agony. They are notoriously aggressive. They are deeply territorial. Oliver simply saw a cool prop laying flat on his stomach in the dirt. Positioning his face a mere 6 inches away from the nest, he extended the heavy camera out with one hand and looked at the screen. The framing was slightly off. The rock was just a little too crooked for demanding artistic tastes, requiring a pivot of a few inches to catch the dappled sunlight. Reaching out a free hand, Oliver grabbed the incredibly fragile, paper-thin exterior of the massive hornet nest, applying a firm, twisting pressure to rotate the prop. You do not rotate a hornet nest. The brittle exterior immediately ruptured inward with a sickening crunch. Oliver tore open the protective barrier of a hive containing roughly 4,000 enraged, highly venomous insects, effectively poking the ultimate biological murder piñata. The response was not a warning. It was an immediate, coordinated military strike. A thick, furious black cloud of pure insect rage erupted from the breach. They poured directly onto Oliver's unprotected face and neck. Hornets do not lose their stingers after a single attack. They sting repeatedly, pumping venom with every single strike. Before Oliver's brain registered the colossal magnitude of his mistake, he received a lethal dose of neurotoxins. Hundreds of hornets swarmed his eyes, nose, and throat. The sheer volume of venom triggered a massive, instantaneous anaphylactic shock. His airway clamped shut. His nervous system short-circuited in the dirt. Oliver never even made it to his knees, dying right there in the mud while clutching his incredibly expensive camera. When park rangers finally discovered his unfortunate location 3 days later, the scene looked less like a nature photo shoot and more like a biological war zone. Oliver never got his award-winning texture shot. Instead, he became a grim all-you-can-eat buffet for the local scavengers, entirely because he treated a buzzing hyperpredator nest like a decorative prop. 6. It is truly breathtaking how quickly sheer boredom can completely override basic human survival instincts. Derek was a night shift inventory clerk who possessed zero respect for heavy machinery, viewing mandatory safety protocols as cowardly suggestions. At 3 in the morning, profound boredom set in. Wanting a gritty, blue-collar profile picture and needing a high-angle shot of the storage racks, the clerk convinced his equally clueless buddy to operate a 10-ton industrial forklift. Grabbing a cheap, splintering wooden shipping pallet, Derek casually tossed it onto the twin steel forks. Without securing the wood with chains or wearing a safety harness, he simply hopped onto the flimsy wooden platform and gave his buddy the thumbs up to hoist him into the air. Anyone who has ever worked a warehouse floor knows the basic mechanics of a forklift. They are engineered to lift tightly wrapped cubes of dense cargo, absolutely not designed to lift a hyperactive human standing on loose pine. As the hydraulic mast groaned, Derek was smoothly elevated 20 feet into the warehouse rafters, creating a 6-meter vertical drop hovering directly over solid industrial concrete. Pulling out his phone and switching to the wide-angle lens, the aspiring model realized standing perfectly still was not dynamic enough. Needing a dominant stance, Derek decided to execute a wide-legged power pose by moving right to the absolute edge of the pallet. Aggressively shifting his weight outward, he popped his hip to catch the fluorescent lighting. This was a fatal miscalculation of gravity. Resting loosely on smooth steel forks, a wooden pallet has zero friction and lacks any locking mechanism. When Derek applied massive downward force to the unsupported overhang of the wood, physics intervened instantly. The pallet violently flipped upward like a giant, wooden seesaw, launching off the steel forks entirely. Instantly stripped of his makeshift stage, Derek hung suspended in the air for a single, terrifying heartbeat, still clutching his phone as his tough guy smirk vanished. Gravity took over with ruthless efficiency, sending him plummeting 20 feet straight down with no time to brace for impact. Falling headfirst, his skull lost a high-speed argument with industrial concrete, and the concrete won by unanimous decision. While his buddy sat in the forklift cabin in stunned silence, the warehouse echoed with the sickening crunch of the impact. Derek officially clocked out of his shift for the last time, leaving behind no viral glory on his shattered phone. Just a traumatized coworker, a severely dented floor, and an immediate OSHA investigation using him as the ultimate gruesome example of why pallets are for cargo, not for clout. 7. Gary was a suburban accountant whose entire wilderness experience consisted of 2 survival shows and a camping trip that ended at a Holiday Inn. Wearing cargo shorts like body armor, he diagnosed himself as an apex predator after learning to identify poison ivy from a meme. Hitting an arid desert trail early on a crisp Saturday morning, the accountant hunted for a rugged, wilderness-conquering profile picture. A few miles in, Gary spotted an incredible prop resting right in the middle of the dusty path. A massive western diamondback rattlesnake. Thick, scaly, and deeply terrifying, the creature was, most importantly, completely motionless. Nudging it with his expensive hiking boot and getting no flinch in return, Gary immediately diagnosed the reptile as deceased. A spectacular terminal mistake. This is exactly where a basic understanding of reptilian biology would have been useful, since cold-blooded snakes rely on external environmental temperatures to run their metabolism. In the chilly hours of an early desert morning, a rattlesnake doesn't die. It enters a state of deep thermal torpor, powering down its biological systems to conserve energy. Becoming stiff and unresponsive, it is essentially a solar-powered murder noodle waiting for the sun to boot up its operating system. Instead of recognizing a fully loaded venomous spring trap in sleep mode, Gary just saw a boring dead snake. Needing to look like a hardened survivor, he decided to wear the massive reptile like a morbid scarf. Reaching down to pick up the heavy, cold predator, he draped the 3-foot creature over his bare neck, pulled out his phone, and framed the shot with a practiced grim stare. Here is where the biology lesson turns deadly. The human neck is a massive biological radiator, pumping 98-degree warmth directly outward. By wrapping a freezing, sleeping snake around a biological heating pad, the sudden influx of thermal energy acted like a defibrillator. Waking up deeply disoriented and extremely angry to find itself trapped against a sweaty ape, the rattlesnake bypassed the warning rattle entirely and went straight for the emergency defense protocol. Just as Gary snapped his grim selfie, the newly defrosted reptile unleashed a blindingly fast strike, delivering a massive, fatal payload of venom directly into his neck. Dropping his phone and ripping the snake away far too late, Gary's system rapidly crashed, sending him collapsing face-first into the dirt. He died right there on the scenic trail, taken out by a creature he had personally gift-wrapped around his own throat. When authorities found his body hours later, the snake was long gone, having successfully defended its territory against the world's most overconfident accountant. 8. Have you ever watched someone do something so recklessly photogenic that you just knew it was about to end in disaster? Julian was the human embodiment of that feeling. As an aesthetic travel vlogger who cared infinitely more about dynamic photo composition than basic geological hazards, this guy visited a high-altitude mountain waterfall featuring a spectacular, unfenced viewing plateau situated right next to the roaring cascade. The drop was a sheer, unforgiving 200 feet straight into a rocky gorge, and the morning air was thick with a dense, freezing mist that acted as the invisible architect of our impending disaster. While a rational tourist stands back from the edge to smile politely and take a safe photo, Julian found that entirely too boring. Craving kinetic energy, he wanted a perfectly timed mid-air jump shot, aiming to levitate effortlessly in front of the raging water. Jamming his phone into a cheap extendable selfie stick and cranking it to full length, the vlogger activated burst mode, needing every single frame of his airborne masterpiece. Backing up for a running start, Julian completely ignored the clearly marked safety perimeter and sprinted toward the absolute edge of the plateau. Any local guide could have warned him about the surface conditions because the stone near a waterfall is not normal rock. It is granite polished by centuries of rushing water until it becomes smoother than a bowling alley lane. Furthermore, the constant mist creates a microscopic layer of highly lubricated green algae covering every inch of the stone, essentially forming nature's version of an industrial slip and slide. Leaping into the air, Julian achieved spectacular vertical height, throwing his arms out wide and flashing a brilliant smile for the lens. Hitting the apex of his jump, he looked incredibly majestic. Then gravity demanded its due, sending the influencer plummeting back to Earth to land squarely on his heavily treaded boots right on the absolute edge of the precipice. Physics immediately executed its final judgment. Because landing from a running jump applies massive forward momentum, the moment Julian's boots hit that water-polished, algae-coated stone, the coefficient of friction might as well have been zero, leaving his expensive rubber soles with absolutely no purchase. All that forward kinetic energy converted into a flawless horizontal slide, instantly replacing his majestic smile with a mask of sheer panic. Windmilling his arms wildly to grab empty air, the vlogger didn't stumble or trip. He simply glided forward like a human hockey puck on a freshly iced rink. The selfie stick's burst mode dutifully captured a stunning 60 frame per second sequence, documenting Julian smoothly sliding straight off the unguarded cliff and disappearing silently into the white mist. The 200-foot freefall ended on the jagged boulders below. The impact completely scrambled his anatomy, violently deleting him from the breathtaking landscape. There was no glorious flipbook of images left to be uploaded, just an abandoned selfie stick floating in the gorge and a very grim reminder that testing the laws of friction on a wet rock is a game you only lose once. 9. Nothing screams holiday cheer quite like risking your mortal life just to definitively outshine the guy living next door. As a deeply competitive homeowner fighting a bitter war to claim the title of the most festive driveway, Todd possessed immense holiday spirit, but entirely lacked basic risk assessment skills. By mid-December, overnight temperatures had plunged below freezing, coating his concrete driveway in a thin sheet of black ice. Unfazed by the hazard, Todd had erected a fully decorated massive pine tree in his front yard that just needed the glowing star on the very top. A triumphant moment he desperately needed to broadcast to his social media rivals. Dragging a heavy aluminum extension ladder out of his garage, our festive warrior set the metal feet directly onto the icy concrete and leaned the top against the flimsy branches of the pine tree. Without asking his wife to hold the base or bothering to secure the ladder, he simply grabbed the star, clutched his phone, and began his perilous ascent. Placing a ladder on ice is a mathematical guarantee of failure, considering aluminum feet provide zero grip on a frozen surface. The entire structural integrity relies purely on downward weight pushing into the ice, meaning that as long as you climb straight up, the downward force keeps the base somewhat stable. Reaching the dizzying height of 20 feet and standing on the second-to-last rung, Todd successfully jammed the star onto the top branch, achieving his decorative victory. Now needing photographic evidence, he decided a normal selfie would not suffice. He wanted a wide-angle shot to capture both the illuminated tree and the icy driveway. Holding the tree with his left hand, he extended his right arm out as far as possible and leaned his upper body backward, stretching outward to get the perfect framing. This reckless action violently altered his center of gravity, shifting his weight away from the vertical axis and dramatically reducing the downward pressure keeping the metal feet pinned to the ice. Seizing the opportunity, the black ice sent the base of the aluminum ladder shooting outward with the speed of a fired torpedo. As the metal scraped horribly against the concrete, the entire 20-foot structure instantly collapsed vertically, leaving Todd hovering in the freezing air for a single heartbeat to actively record his own doom before plummeting straight down. Hitting the icy concrete might have only broken his spine, but unfortunately, Todd's equally competitive neighbor had erected a massive, solid cast-iron reindeer right on the property line. This heavy metal lawn ornament featured incredibly aggressive, spear-like iron antlers. Falling 20 feet, Todd landed directly onto the neighbor's festive wildlife, introducing 200 pounds of falling human to 300 pounds of immovable cast iron at terminal velocity. The jagged metal antlers and rigid iron frame did exactly what solid metal does to a soft body dropped from that height, since no winter coat on Earth was designed to absorb that kind of impact. Gone before he even truly hit the ground, Todd became an involuntary and deeply disturbing addition to the neighbor's festive lawn display, bringing his holiday season to an abrupt, brutal halt. He certainly won the decoration war, but at the cost of his own life. His quest for suburban dominance ended in a spectacularly grim fashion, cementing his legacy not as the undisputed king of Christmas, but as the neighborhood's most graphic cautionary tale. 10. If human ego weighed as much as cast iron, Chad would have been the undisputed strongest man on planet Earth. He was a hyper-confident amateur bodybuilder. His daily protein intake vastly exceeded his cognitive output. He treated every single workout like a heavily produced fitness commercial. He chased the ultimate alpha male aesthetic for his vlog. On a crowded Monday evening, Chad decided to capture his masterpiece. He wanted to execute the legendary hands-free barbell selfie. He swaggered over to a flat bench press station tucked in the corner of the free weight section. No spotter, no safety rack with catch bars, just a basic bench with two shallow J-hooks cradling a loaded barbell. Chad piled on 315 pounds of cold iron. That is roughly 143 kilograms, approximately the weight of a commercial refrigerator suspended directly above your ribcage. A normal lifter would beg someone to spot them. Chad considered asking for help a sign of genetic weakness. He laid flat on the padded bench, grabbed the bar, and muscled it up into a full press. He wanted the photo to look effortless, like he could hold this weight forever. So he re-racked the bar, but here is where his walnut-sized brain made the lethal call. The J-hooks on a bench press are shallow, U-shaped metal cradles. The barbell needs to sit deep in the groove to be secure. Chad set the bar down lazily, resting it on the absolute front lip of the hooks, barely an inch of steel between the iron and open air. Why? Because from this position, the bar sat slightly forward of his face, giving his phone camera the perfect angle to capture all four massive plates on each side. Aesthetics over engineering. Then Chad did the truly unforgivable thing. He released his grip on the bar entirely. He reached down into his gym bag, pulled out his smartphone, and raised both hands above his face. He arched his massive back, popped his chest into a vascular flex, and stared lovingly into his front-facing camera. Now, here is a basic law of physics that Chad's protein-soaked brain completely ignored. When you aggressively flex every muscle on a padded bench, your body generates vibrations. Chad inhaled a massive gulp of air, clamped his core, and squeezed every single fiber to make his veins pop for the camera. This generated an intense rhythmic tremor that transferred directly from his torso through the bench frame and straight into those flimsy J-hooks. Chad hit his ultimate muscle-quivering peak pose and snapped the photo. The micro-vibration did its silent work. The barbell rolled that final half-inch forward, slipped clean off the shallow lip of the J-hook, and gravity instantly reclaimed every ounce of iron. The massive bar entered a catastrophic freefall. It dropped a full 2 feet straight downward. It made direct, devastating contact right in the dead center of Chad's heavily tanned sternum. The sheer kinetic energy of the impact instantly collapsed his entire chest cavity. It aggressively redesigned his entire upper anatomy. It stopped his heart on contact. He was flatlined by his own ego. The gym went silent. The only sound was the heavy metallic clatter of the iron settling heavily against his sternum. Paramedics arrived to find him practically bolted to the bench press, having transformed himself into a two-dimensional addition to the gym floor. The coroner's report cited massive blunt force trauma, though they reluctantly noted his incredible post-mortem vascularity in the final selfie. Common sense isn't a flower that grows in everyone's garden anymore, especially if you hold a selfie stick. To the folks watching who actually know how to work with their hands, go to the comments and tell me the most baffling lack of common sense you have ever personally witnessed in real life. Share the chaos, then hit like and subscribe so we can keep documenting humanity's worst decisions together.